Let me tell you, give you a little heads up. I am actually watching a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old as we speak. They're in the other room watching, I don't know, Barney or Daniel Tiger or something. But at any moment they will burst in, and I'll need to go and put in a new episode or something. I don't know what'll happen, but I'm just letting you know that I'm expecting to be interrupted at some point. So Joe is has been away at a girls' weekend all weekend, and she won't be back until this afternoon. So
you got both.
Left grandpa was the whole thing.
Wow.
You got those kids and feel your pain.
all right, but we're in Proverbs. Yeah. So we did a introduction to Proverbs last week, and so we're actually going to start in with our kind of verse by verse address, and we'll begin at verse 2. We kind of covered verse 1, which was really about the authorship, and did some on some of the truths or rules that we're going to have to deal with as we go through Proverbs, and I'll come back to some of that in a minute. But I actually want to start with verse 2 and work our way through. So let's see. Yes, right. Okay, verse 2, it says, to know wisdom and instruction, to proceed words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. So what we have here in verses 2 through 4 really is a synopsis of the purpose of Proverbs. Now, as I said last week, verses 1 through 7, 1 through 9 really are introductory comments to the whole book of Proverbs. They give us a foundation before we get into the details, which really begin around verse 10. And what we have right here in verses 2 through 4 is a nice succinct statement of what is the purpose of Proverbs. So mine says to know wisdom and instruction. You could also you could also interpret that as foreknowing wisdom and instruction. So in other words, the purpose of Proverbs is knowing, is for understanding, is for perceiving, is for receiving, is for giving prudence. All of those things that is the purpose of Proverbs. So right out of the beginning, it uses the word to know. Those of you who've been around long enough know that word is a very intimate word. It's the word that when it said that Adam knew his wife and then they conceived, it's obviously a very intimate word that we're talking about here when it says know. So when it says that the Proverbs are for us to know wisdom, it's to know it in a very intimate way. It's to know it in a very personal way. As we talked about last week, there is supposed to be a love relationship between us and wisdom. And so that is, so you want to know wisdom. You want to know it well. You want to really get it and get it in a very intimate way. So to know wisdom, and we used, last time I used the shorthand definition for wisdom as understanding or seeing things from God's perspective. I wanted to edit that because I really, the more and more I study Proverbs and I understand what it means by wisdom, I think a better shorthand would be seeing and doing things from God's perspective. There's an action part of wisdom that we don't want to miss here. It's not just a matter of what goes on in our head. It's a matter of what we do. So it's seeing and doing things from God's perspective. So we want to have a intimate relationship with seeing and doing things from God's perspective. It's an intimate relationship with God. Obviously, it's an intimate relationship with Christ in order to be able to see and do things from God's perspective. All right, then it says to know wisdom and instruction. Now, another word for instruction that you may have in your translation is the word discipline. Right? It's to know wisdom and instruction, or discipline, or what I was calling last week the patterns or the principles, right? The patterns that are there in God's creation that we need to understand if we want to live this life in a way that's pleasing to him. So it's to know and understand wisdom and instruction and the patterns and the discipline involved in that, the disciplines involved in that. There's another piece of this which is connected to the word self-control. Right? It's controlling yourself, it's disciplining yourself, it's understanding the patterns. And then it says to perceive the words of understanding. Perceive again, right? It's to capture, it's to get. It's the design of the book is such that we will perceive the words of understanding. So applying your mind to the words, to the instructions, to the patterns, such that you actually gain insight, that you gain that level of understanding or insight into those patterns, such that they impact and affect your life. I want you to turn for a minute. Let me just say in general, I'm going to need your fingers warmed up because we're going to be looking at a bunch of scriptures, particularly in the New Testament, because what I want you to really get is that there's not a disconnect between what Proverbs says and what is said in the New Testament. So flip for a minute to Hebrews chapter 5. Hebrews chapter 5. We'll look at verse 12. Hebrews 5:12. Right, Hebrews 5:12 says, "For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you, again, the first principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil." So I think this is the way the New Testament talks about the same things that Proverbs is talking about when it says wisdom and instruction and perceiving understanding, right? It's understanding righteousness. It's understanding these first principles. It's the ability to discern good and evil. It's the ability to reason and use your senses. So all of those things are the same things that we're reading about here in Proverbs. One other place I want you to look while you're there is Philippians. Philippians chapter 1. Philippians chapter 1, we'll pick up at verse 9. Philippians chapter 1, verse 9. Mine says, "In this I pray, that your love may abound still more and more in knowledge and all discernment, and that you may approve the things that are excellent, that you may be sincere and without offense until the day of Christ, being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." So again, connecting what we're reading here with what we said last week, right? I pray that your love may abound still more and more, the love of Christ, the love of wisdom, more and more in knowledge and discernment, right? Again, in understanding these principles, that you approve the things that are excellent, sincere and without offense, filled with the fruits of righteousness in Jesus Christ, again, to the glory and praise of God. That, again, is why we do all of these things. So again, just connecting you between Proverbs and what's in the New Testament, it's the same lesson that's being taught. The purpose of Proverbs is the same as the expectation of living the Christian faith. Right? The expectation of living the Christian faith and the purpose of Proverbs are exactly the same. It's the same thing. So connect that in your head. One more, sorry, I should have, while your fingers were there, go to 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy, I always think Timothy should be in front of Thessalonians, but it's on the wrong side. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14. 2 Timothy 3:14. Mine says, you must continue in the things which you have learned and been assured of knowing from who you have learned them, and that from childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God, is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work, right? You have known the Scriptures from childhood, and you're able to make you wise for salvation, right? That is the connection. It is wise for salvation. Wisdom connected to salvation. All right, let's go back to Proverbs. But that's the purpose, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. We're going to come back to verse 2 in a minute. We get a little further along, but let's go on to verse 3. It says to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity. First of all, again, we said instruction was the discipline, right? The patterns, if you will. So to receive the patterns of wisdom was one thing interesting here is the word wisdom in verse 3 is not the same as the word wisdom in verse 2. The word wisdom in verse 3 would better be interpreted wise behavior or wise living. Again, it's focusing on the action part of wisdom. The two words are not the same. So it is saying to receive the patterns such that you can live wisely, such that you can do the things that are wise, do the things that are according to the patterns. Now, it's interesting here that the second part of this verse adds justice, judgment, and equity. These words are somewhat hard to interpret. The ones that I like, and it depends on your version, which ones you have, but the ones that I like are what is right, what is just, and what is equitable. Right. So what is being done here is he's connecting wisdom to the moral. They're not morally indifferent, the words of wisdom, right? There's a connection between morality, i.e. what's right, and what's just, and what's equitable. By the way, equitable simply means no favoritism, right? So he's connecting he's making sure you understand that all the wisdom that we're talking about, all these patterns are connected to what's right and what's just and what's equitable. So this is what we should be striving for. What's right, what's just, what's equitable, and we get those through these patterns that we're going to see as we get more and more into Proverbs. But I don't want you to miss that. That's an important connection, and we'll see it several times as we go through Proverbs. He keeps bringing us back to the point that these are not just good things to do in the world, the way to live right in the world. No, these are about righteousness and justice and equity. All right, verse 4. To give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. So we talked about this word prudence last time. Do you remember what I said it was? What was prudence? Some people flip back in their notes. Other people try to remember really hard what's in their brain.
Discernment.
Discernment, but more closely to shrewdness and cleverness and subtlety. Okay, it's that. Interestingly enough, when we were in Matthew, if you remember back in Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, Jesus says he wants us to be wise as serpents, which seems to be an odd statement, right? We associate serpents with Satan, but Jesus is saying here, I want you to be wise as serpents. I want you to be shrewd, subtle, crafty in understanding these things, right? Prudence. I want you to give prudence to the simple. And by the way, by the simple he simply means here those who haven't figured it out yet, those who are still young in their maturity. I want you to give them shrewdness and subtlety to understand this, because it says to the young man knowledge and discretion, right? Knowledge, again, being the patterns, knowledge of the instruction, knowledge and discretion. I want the young men, I want the simple and young men to have craftiness prudence, cleverness as they understand these patterns and apply them in their lives. One thing that I said last week, and I still want to say it again, is that I feel like we all should have had a lesson on Proverbs when we were young, to really understand these patterns and to get them ingrained in our lives while we were young, before we made a bunch of dumb mistakes, right? One thing I will say that I do appreciate is that years ago, right after we were married, we took the Bill Gothard seminar. How many of you are familiar with the Bill Gothard Institute, Basic Life Principles, or Institute, all that stuff? What I realized as I was thinking back on that was a lot of Proverbs. Yes, there's a lot of the teaching right here that was in Proverbs. And I'm just so thankful that I had that early on in my life and was thinking about what are the patterns in my marriage? What are the patterns as I raise my kids, right? I think that getting those patterns early on is really important. So I was just thankful for that. So the young men, knowledge and discretion. Again, discretion, discernment. One of the translations was thoughtfulness, or the freedom to act in certain situations. In other words, the freedom to make a decision and move forward. Discernment in the sense of discerning the right path, and the discretion. The discretion has two different definitions, right? There's discretion of being careful about stuff, and then there's also the discretion to act. And I think he's really talking about here the discretion to act, the freedom to act, because you understand the patterns and you understand what God wants in the wide variety of situations. He's focusing here on the young, the simple, and then in verse 5, he's looking at the wise man, or the man of understanding, in the second half, right? So if verse 4 is for the young, verse 5 is for those who are more mature. And he's focusing here, saying a wise man will hear. A wise man will listen. A wise man doesn't think he knows it all, right? If you're wise, you'll continue to learn. You'll continue to recognize there are things that you still don't get, and frankly will never get. I want to go back to last week. I got some interesting reaction to the statements that I made last week about Proverbs not being promises, Proverbs not being laws. Well, let me say this. I might be completely wrong about that. Maybe Proverbs are promises. Maybe Proverbs are rules. But you might be completely wrong too. And Proverbs maybe really are not promises, and they really are not rules. I think that the focus of this verse is, let's pay attention and listen. Let's hear. Let's make sure we don't get so locked in our brains into I know exactly what the right answer is, that we're not available for God to teach us, right? And I think that's so important here. And so he's saying the wise men will listen, will hear. And obviously, I'm not just talking about listening to me. It's listening to God and listening to make sure you don't get so locked into something you heard 30 years ago in some Sunday school lesson, that is the only way that's got to be true. Well, maybe God's trying to say, hey, there's more to wisdom. There's more to understanding than the things that you have figured out. Because frankly, we can't figure it out, and that's the dilemma, right? So the wise men will hear and increase learning. Learning's a lifelong thing versus the young man in verse 4 was just beginning to learn. He increases his learning. He continues to learn. He will hear. The other thing about hearing is that it does give you the impression that the Proverbs are supposed to be something that you listen to, something that you hear. It's a couple of the commentaries talked about the Proverbs in the way that they were taught to the young men in this day was a discussion, was a reading of the Proverbs and a discussion by the group on what does that mean? How do I apply that to my life? And I just encourage you all as we are going through these to push back on me and say, well, I think this is what it might mean. I know you do that pretty well so far, but I'm just want to encourage it again, because I think particularly as we go through Proverbs, we're supposed to be learning from one another, and you need to hear them and increase your learning and be willing to listen. All those things are wrapped up in these verses that I think are really important. They're made to be discussed, debated, and understood. And then the last part of this, it says, a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. A man of understanding or discernment or insight, right? Once you get that insight, once you get a level of understanding, you will acquire wise counsel. That means you will go and get wise counsel. You will go and find it. You will acquire it in the sense of you'll go and pay for it. You'll pay for it with your time, with your effort. You really, it's important to you to get wise counsel. By the way, the interesting thing here is the word here for wise counsel in the original Hebrew is the word for seamanship, the ability to steer a boat. Okay, and he's saying if you're a man of understanding, you will go find out how best to steer the boat of your life in the midst of all the stuff that goes on, right? Attain wise counsel, attain from someone who knows how to steer a boat, someone who knows seamanship, right? Get that and go and pay for it. Go and spend your time, spend your energy, spend your brain power trying to gain wise counsel. It's not something that just happens to you. You've got to do something, attain it, go for it. Verse 6. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. So I want to hear some other translations of that verse. Mine has proverbs, enigma, words of the wise, and riddles. What does yours say?
Proverbs and a figure.
Proverbs and what?
Figure.
Hmm.
A
Figure.
figure, okay.
Mine is Proverbs and a saying.
The saying,
A figure of
Proverbs,
speech.
Parables.
figure of speech, parables. Good. Anything else at the end?
Riddles of the wise.
Yeah. Same.
Riddles for the wise?
Riddles, yeah, at the
Yeah.
end.
Good. So these are three words that are a little confusing to translate, and so all those things are good for you, are good for you to hear. But I think what we have here mine says proverbs, enigmas, words of the wise, and riddles. These are the words that we talked about in verse 2, right? It says, perceive the words of understanding, perceive the words that you need to understand, perceive the words of these patterns. The patterns come to you in proverbs, in parables, in enigmas, in knots, in some of the translations say in dark words, in riddles. He's saying here, again, this is going to be work to understand these patterns. It's not easy. Jesus spoke in parables, right? Then they were not easy to understand. He had to explain them all to his disciples. They come in confusion, a little bit of confusion in Proverbs and things that are not clear. And he's saying that it's your job to understand them, to pull out the understanding, to get the riddle, to get the proverb, to get the parable, to untangle the enigma, and get the learning out of it, get the insight out of it. The other thing I want to show you, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2, a verse that we actually looked at a couple of weeks ago, but again, I want to pull it into what we're talking about here with these riddles and parables. And 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 13. Or verse 12, we'll start. 1 Corinthians 2:12. We could keep going backwards. We'll just go backwards that far. 1 Corinthians 2:12, mine says, now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might know the things that have been freely given to us by God. These things we also speak, not in words which man's wisdom teaches, but which the Holy Spirit teaches, comparing spiritual things to spiritual. But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, or a parable to him, or an enigma to him. Nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. But he who is spiritual judges all things, yet he himself is rightly judged by no one, right? These things are not understood by those who are not spiritual. These things are not understood by those who do not know Christ, right? So back in Proverbs then, it's our job to understand these, and the only chance we have of doing that is verse 7. Verse 7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of untangling proverbs, parables, enigmas, words of the wise, and riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. What is the fear of the Lord?
Knowledge.
I didn't hear that. What does it mean when it says the fear of the Lord?
It's our only correct response to knowing him, to his creation of us, his judgment over us, his ruling of the world. To know that he is God and he is in charge.
Good. Somebody else add to that. That's good, Rick. Somebody else add. What does it mean, fear of the Lord? What does that mean to you?
I would think that because God is all-knowing and he knows intricate details of our life, that he is the best source for complexities and demands and challenges and things that we don't understand, that he is the source. And if we lean on him, then we should be able to decipher the right way.
Good, Russell. Good. What else? The fear of I am is what is actually in the Hebrew. The fear of I am is the beginning of knowledge.
Fear would equate to love the Lord, respect the Lord, trust the Lord.
Bill, how do you get that? What do you mean? The fear of the Lord is the same as the love of the Lord?
Yeah. Well, to us, we see this fear and immediately, at least to me, the first thing that comes to your mind is the fear of something that's going to hurt you, or the fear of some kind of danger. And I don't think that's what they're referring to. I just think that for me, and biblically, when it talks about the fear of the Lord, I think it's talking about our love for him, our respect for him, our trust or faith in him and his promises.
Yeah, these are all good, that was a really nice breadth of responses. So thank you, Rick, Russell. That was really good. What other Tom? Go ahead.
I've always the fear of the Lord. I've always looked at this as the Lord is our Father, and I look at that as my Father, and you respect his authority, his position. And if you get out of line, there's going to be correction, but there's always love. And I've always looked at that father-son relationship, and I don't, you look at the awesomeness of what God is. He's God, now I'm not. But again, I always look back that God is my Father. He created us, and basically, that's the relationship I've always kind of looked at. So.
And I would throw in that there is some, to me, there is some fear in that if I don't live like God has, arranged for me, I should be afraid of what my consequences are going to be. I mean, or what if I don't live, you know, just that those commandments and say, here's what we're supposed to be doing. If I don't live like that, there's going to be some kind of, this isn't right, you know, some kind of consequence to, and I should be afraid of that. I mean, so from the fear point, using that word of fear, but I like the other things too. I mean, so there's a whole range.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
My father, I love my father, but I understand what his position was. And that maybe in my mind, that's the way I've always looked at it, that God is my father, just like my dad was my father. You respect the position and you realize if you do something stupid, there's going to be correction, like you said. But I never feared my father from that relationship, I guess. You know, there was total respect and you knew that, you know, the love was there, but it may be wrong, but that's the way I've always looked at it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rich, that I think that Proverbs to me is not a series of do's and don'ts. It's not clear cut, do this and don't do that. I think everybody's life is unique. And because of that, God knows the best purpose designed for your particular unique life more than anybody else, and that he should be the source to guide you. Because what might be wrong to one person might be okay with another. And it's not clearly black and white for everybody.
That's good too. Good. All right.
Yeah.
What?
I'm cheating a little bit, but sense of awe and giving God your undivided attention.
I missed part of what you said there, Walter. Say it again.
A little bit. I'm looking it up. Okay, I'm cheating a lot.
Yeah, so I think in this regard, right, I think all of what you've said is excellent and I really appreciate it. And I think in this regard, right, it's in order for us to understand the patterns, in order for us to understand or get knowledge and discernment and insight into these patterns that God is laying out for us in Proverbs, if we don't have a relationship with him, they're not going to make any sense whatsoever, right? They're just going to be silliness, foolishness. To the fool, they're just foolishness, right? And that's, of course, what the second part of this says, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fools just see this as all silliness. Whereas we who understand who God is and have that relationship with him as Father, as Creator, as Judge, as lover of our soul, right? We can then understand these patterns. Without that relationship, these patterns don't make any sense. And I think that's exactly what he's saying. If you want to unscramble these proverbs or these enigmas or these riddles, you've got to have this relationship. You got to come from there, or these things will not make any sense. And the other thing is, it's also that lens through which, as we read through these proverbs, we can understand them, we can get them. We have to have that lens in place of knowing who he is, that he is the beginning, he's the foundation of all of that knowledge. And then as we read through them, then we have the right perspective. Again, that, you know, that we have this relationship with Christ, that Christ is wisdom. And as we're trying to understand wisdom, we're trying to understand Christ. We're trying to understand how we live this Christian life. We're trying to understand how we live a life that glorifies God. All those things are the same thing. So if you don't have that connection, these things just become weird statements and riddles that you just pass by. All right. So that's primarily the prologue, if you would, to Proverbs. Verses 8 and 9 are kind of now an introduction into the Proverbs themselves. So let's look at verses 8 and 9. It says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck." So again, as we said last time, many of these early chapters are addressed to my son. These are lessons, if you will, and verses 10 through 19 is certainly the first lesson. And for all of these lessons, verses 8 and 9 are instructions to really verses 8 and 9 are instructions to chapters 1 through 9. All of these instructions saying, hear these instructions, listen to them, pay attention to them. These are the disciplines, these are the patterns. And when it says, My son, hear the instruction of your father. Do not forsake the law of your mother. The word law there may be better translated as teaching or direction. Listen to the direction of your mother. Listen to the instruction and teaching of your mother and the instruction of your father. It is fascinating to me that both mother and father are here, right? This is supposed to be a joint program. This is supposed to be something they're both involved in and trying to help their children understand the patterns and understand what is right and how to live that life that will please God. They're both involved in that through instruction and through teaching. And then verse 9, right, is really talking about the rewards. It says, for they will be a graceful ornament to your head. In other words, these instructions, these patterns will be a graceful ornament on your head and a chain about your neck. What's interesting here in verse 9, these are symbols of rewards that Egyptians would get, right? These are, if you remember all the way back to the story of Daniel and Joseph, both of them got some kind of crown or ornament or wreath on their head and some kind of chain or necklace around their neck when they got into positions of authority. So he's saying that these instructions, these teachings from your mother and father are the ornaments, are the way that you're going to know that you're successful when you have them and you have them captured about you. All right, good. So we have enough time to actually get into the first lesson. So that was all introduction. So let's get on to, if we can, we'll try to get through 10 through 19 in the next 15 minutes here. Again, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. So in verses 10 through 19, verse 10 is actually a summary statement of the whole lesson. He's saying, if sinners entice you, do not consent. That's the summary of what I'm about to teach you. If sinners entice you, do not consent to that. Then what we'll see in 11 through 14, he talks about that enticement, what that enticement is all about. In 15 through 18, he talks about how to resist that enticement. And then 19 is kind of a wrap up. So again, verse 10, he's enticing them to join them. This is a lesson about wrong friends, about joining in with people that are not going to be helpful as you go through this journey. So this is the first lesson that is provided to these young men. Don't join in, watch your companionship. They're enticing you to be part of the group. They're enticing you to be part of the gang, if you will. And you have heard enough about gangs to know one of the reasons they do so well is they provide a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, right? To young people that don't have a sense of belonging, don't have a sense of purpose. One thing I learned a while ago, and I can't remember exactly where I learned it, was that the world offers us often a place to belong, a group to be a part of, such that we will feel that we're worthy. Whereas the Bible flips that around and says, no, you're worthy. You're worthy, and therefore you belong. You're worthy because Christ died for you. That shows your worth, and therefore you belong in his kingdom. But the world does that the other way around. Oh, why don't you belong to this? Why don't you belong to that? And that'll show how popular you are, how amazing you are if you just belong to this group. And God's saying, no. You are worthy of the death of my son. Therefore you belong. Anyway, so that's what's going on here. They're being enticed to join. And the teacher is saying, do not consent to that. So let's go on. Verse 11. Verse 11, come. If they say to you, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Come with us, right? Come away from the way of wisdom. Come with us, this gang mentality. And of course, we know sinners love company. And then lie in wait to shed blood. Their goal is murder. As they're very upfront about it here. They're going to shed innocent blood. They know the victim is innocent. They're going without cause at the end, right? And we'll see a little bit later, their only goal really is greed. They don't care about a person's life. We go back to, just as an example, back in Ephesians 5, where it says, let no man deceive you, right? let no man deceive you. And this is exactly what he's saying here. Do not let this group pull you in. Do not let them entice you away from what you know is wisdom, what you know that your Father has taught you, what you know that this relationship with God has taught you. Verse 12, let us swallow them alive like Sheol, the whole like those who go down to the pit, right? So let us swallow them alive and whole, down to Sheol and the pit. So there's a couple things here. He's saying, let's do it quickly. Let's do it without hesitation. There's no holding back. We're going to grab them alive. We're going to throw them into the pit. We're going to swallow them up fast. So therefore, we won't be detected. But there's also the connection here to hell, is there not? Right? You are in league. We are in league with the devil. We're going to be pulling people into Sheol. We're going to be pulling people into the pit. And that he's trying to encourage the young man. By the way, this is going to happen quickly. There's not going to be any problem. There's no consequences of sin. Just get in league with us. There won't be any consequences. It'll happen fast. Verse 13, we will find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Right? After we kill the owner, the gang now is free to plunder his house and get all of his possessions. And of course, plundering that usually happens after there's some kind of battle. And they're saying, well, we're in a battle, we're fighting, and we're killing this man, and therefore we get all of his possessions. What's interesting here is it says to fill our houses with this spoil or with these possessions. So these were not men without anything. They were men with houses, and they're going to fill their houses even more. They're going to try to become even more rich, if you will, based on the plundering that they're going to do. Verse 14, cast your lot among us. Let us all have one purse, right? Join our gang. We are the good gang. We're the best place. We will love you. We will take care of you. We will make sure the pot is split equally amongst us. 1 Corinthians 15:33, you don't have to turn there, right? Evil company corrupts good habits, right? And they're encouraging them to join them in their evil company. So finally, we have the father then, giving better instruction in verse 15. He says, my son, do not walk in the way of them. Keep your foot from their path, right? Do not go. Is direct opposition to what they're saying. Come with us. He's saying, don't do it. Don't get on that way. Don't get on the path that they're on. Don't get on the character that they're showing. Watch out for the kind of people that you're aligning yourself with. Watch the way, the conduct that they're espousing. And frankly, the inevitable consequences that they will lead you to. Don't get on that way. And of course, this reminds us of Matthew 7, right? Broad is the way that leads to destruction. And he's trying to teach them, no, stay on the narrow way. I love that he has at the second half of this, keep your foot from the path. Don't even stick one foot on there, right? Don't take the first step. And this is the dilemma that we have. We think, well, I can just put one foot there. I'm certainly not going to go there. I'll just stick my toe over the line. I'll just taste a little bit, right? And God is instructing us over and over and over to run away. And he's saying, don't step there. Don't even get close to that. Don't even put one foot there. Don't get close to sin. Stay away. Because verse 16, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. You may think you're just sticking one foot there, but you will quickly be running to evil. They're quickly running to it, not stepping, not walking, not inching. They're like addicts running after evil. And by the way, the word evil here is an interesting word. It has two components to it. It's both the moral evil, all right, what God hates, and also the physical calamity that's produced by it, the results of evil, if you will. So he's saying their feet run towards that immorality, and it runs towards the calamity. It runs right towards the problems that they're going to face because they're doing that, which is really, again, now the emphasis of verse 17. It says, surely in vain a net is spread in the sight of a bird. What that verse is saying, if you throw a net in front of a bird, the bird's going to go, oh, that's a net. I don't want to go in there. I'm going to fly away, right? But stupid people like us, these evil ones, put in front of us a net and we just walk right into it. We put our foot in. You say even a bird is smarter than that, right? Even a bird knows if there's a net, the end result of that net is going to be death. The end result of that net is going to be calamity. He's saying be at least as smart as a bird, right? And verse 18 carries that picture further. He says, but they lie in wait for their own blood, right? Which goes back to verse 11, right? He says, let us lie in wait to shed blood. And he's saying here in verse 18, but they lie in wait for their own blood. In other words, they're setting a net which they are going to catch themselves in, right? There is inevitable consequences to what they're doing. These friends which you have joined with are going to lead you to your own blood and their own blood and your own demise and in your fall. They lurk secretly for their own lives. The end of their trap is themselves. Galatians 6, 7, and 8 says, God is not mocked. A person reaps what he sows, right? These people are sowing murder, death, calamity, and what are they going to get? Murder, death, calamity in themselves. Verse 19, the moral of the story. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. He takes away the life of its owners. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. So are the ways of everyone who joins forces with people who are greedy for gain. That unjust gain clings to that person and eventually destroys them. You know the story of Judas, right? We just learned about him. He was all about money, getting some money in order to turn Jesus over to the rulers. And eventually, right, he just throws the money away. He just throws it down. The money doesn't mean anything anymore when he realizes what he has actually done. This idea that money is somehow profitable, right? And of course, we know 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all evil. Turn back to Matthew again, Matthew chapter 16. Let me just show you a couple more things to close out here. Matthew 16. Let's start at verse 25. Excuse me, yeah, verse 25. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it of a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So these are men who have, again, the teacher here is instructing this young man, stay away from these people, right? Stay away from them, because otherwise you're going to give your whole life in exchange for your soul. You're going to be fighting after the gains of the world. And listen, folks, don't just take this as a limitation on just money, right? He's saying, what is your focus? Is your focus on the gains of the world, on looking good to the world, of being popular, being important, being a person who other people look at and say, oh, what a cool dude that is, right? But are you exchanging your soul for that? Are you exchanging your soul for that? 1 Peter chapter 5. First Peter, we'll finish up here. 1 Peter chapter 5. First Peter chapter 5, verse 8. So what I'm hearing in the background is the two kids, the volume is starting to go up in the room next to me. Any moment now, someone's going to burst through the door, but we're good. We're near the end. We've almost made it. First Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world, right? Be sober, be vigilant. Look, again, there's an activeness to this search for the patterns. And be sober, be vigilant. Because your adversary, the devil, he would love for you not to study these. He would love for you not to understand these patterns. He would love to devour you and take you away and think that the world is more important than these. You're not hearing screaming in the background, are you?
No. Somebody's killing somebody.
They're all good. I can tell by the kind of screaming it is that this is just annoying screaming, not pain screaming. Anyway. All right. So that is our first lesson in Proverbs about companionship, about friendship, and frankly, about our focus on understanding these patterns and not getting pulled away by the enticement of the world, pulling us into the gifts of the world, the jewels of the world, right? All right. Anything else on that before we start praying for my grandchildren?
I got a question.
Yeah.
How do we go about where that line is for? I mean, it's going to be different for different people, I guess, to some extent. Russell was saying earlier, we all, just thinking of the easy things off the top of my head, different people talk different people do different things, some people smoke, some people drink, and you have believers that do all that kind of thing. And you get caught up in, and so I don't want to use the word caught up, but how do we discern who we're hanging out with and how much we're hanging out with them? How we, how does that work? I mean, so some of us go to different movies. Some of us do. I mean, there's just all kinds of different things that pop into my head and different levels of the world, I guess, and how it applies to us and how it applies to the next believer and that kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah. So let me say two things, and the second thing is the most important thing. The first thing is when I've said before, God is telling us to be careful about our friends. We should not have best friends that are non-believers. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have friends that are non-believers, because otherwise we cannot reach anyone, right? We should not, it doesn't say we should not have acquaintances that are non-believers, or we're not going to reach anyone. But you got to be careful who your best friends are, who you're spending most of your time with, who you're learning from, and who you're taking counsel from, right? That's the important thing. And the amazing thing, CT, is that God has given us the Holy Spirit to tell us what's right for us, to tell us where that line is for me. And unfortunately, we don't pay attention to that Holy Spirit very much. We'd much rather pay attention to what our friends think or what the world says, right? But the Holy Spirit will say, no, you need to reach out here. You need to step into the mud a little bit here in order to reach this person. Or, no, you need to get out of the mud there because you're getting it all over you, right? So I think we just need to, and I know that that's, there's not an A, B, C, D to the answer to your question. The answer to your question is listen to the Holy Spirit, and he will give clarity on that. And that's the best I can tell you.
You did pretty good all day.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's a lot of instruction going on in the room next door now, from the older to the younger. All right. I'm going to put this on mute while we pray. So obviously I would appreciate your prayers for Joe and the girls as they travel back. They're up in Maryland at a retreat for their girls' weekend, and they'll be driving back in this rain and such. So I would appreciate your prayers for them, and just for my sanity over the next couple of hours until we reconnect. It's been honestly, the girls have been great, and I've had a great time. So anyway, I'm going to put it on mute and let you guys get your prayer. Let's see. We had Melody or Curtis online. So who we got?
Yeah, how you doing? This is Curtis.
Yeah.
Well, first I got 2 or 3 prayer requests. Melody can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Melody was teaching aerobics the other